A motion about people fleeing war became a campaign about small boats. A city was told one story, but the evidence tells another. We never actually joined. For 4 years, Sunderland argued over one phrase: City of Sanctuary. It was blamed for bringing asylum seekers here, and it became a major election issue. It divided neighbours, and some people blamed it for changing our city. You see, politics has a funny way of making people hate each other. And it's not because they're bad people, but it's because politics tells stories that people get attached to. And once people think they found someone to blame, the facts become optional. Now, this video isn't about asking whether immigration is good or bad. I'm asking a much simpler question. What actually happened? I'd heard the phrase City of Sanctuary for quite a while, but I never actually stopped to ask what it actually was. Depending on who you listen to, it sounded like either an immigration policy or a refugee settling scheme. And the thing is, the truth is far less dramatic than everybody thought. It's a voluntary recognition awarded by an independent charity to councils that can demonstrate that they are creating a welcoming environment for people fleeing war and persecution. So on June 22nd, 2022, that was when the original City of Sanctuary or Council of Sanctuary motion was brought to the chamber.
Council recognises the need for our city to promote the welfare and inclusion of all people fleeing violence, persecution, or who are isolated and seeking safety.
The council unanimously voted to work towards becoming a council of sanctuary. That was cross-party, so the Lib Dems and the Conservatives and Labour all voted. And what's interesting about that is there are a couple of members of Reform that are former Tories who actually were there on the 22nd of June 2022 and were members of the Conservative Party who voted for the Council of Sanctuary.
62 votes in favour, no abstentions, no votes against, and so the motion is carried.
So Sunderland did the work towards it, but were never actually officially recognised. And that distinction turns out to be one of the most important parts of this story. Now, if you've heard about the Council of Sanctuary or the City of Sanctuary over the past few years, you probably think it's an immigration policy or something to do with small boats or something about open borders. It wasn't. To understand this motion, we have to go back to February of 2022, the 24th of February to be exact. Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Millions of people were fleeing their homes, families right across the country, terrified and just wanted to escape the war that Putin had brought to them. Literal families separated overnight, spread across Europe. And countries were asking, how can we help these people? And that was the backdrop on the 22nd of June, 2022. Sunderland City Council debated this motion.
You only need to look at the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, amongst many others, to understand the full scale of devastation.
Roman and Dan, who were my guests under the Homes for Ukraine scheme, now live in our home in Silksworth, after they were forced to leave the war-torn Ukraine after the callous, brutal invasion by Putin.
And this is where history starts to get rewritten. But if we're going to debate about the City of Sanctuary, we need to debate what it was actually about, not what politicians and disruptors decided to claim it was about later on. In the motion, it says that we will work towards becoming a Council of Sanctuary, we will support people fleeing violence, we will improve community cohesion and integration. So do you notice what isn't actually in here? There's nothing about small boats, there's nothing about asylum hotels, there's nothing about open borders. Nothing that gives Sunderland power over immigration, because councils literally don't control immigration. They don't control any of that.
The council, unfortunately, does not have legal powers to detain, deport or remove anyone from the UK.
And that small piece of information right there is absolutely key. Sunderland Reform's Chris Einon has just acknowledged there that Sunderland City Council doesn't have and never has had any powers over immigration. And if that's true, then it obviously raises a question or two. So why did Reform repeatedly tell residents that the increase in asylum seekers was due to the City of Sanctuary motion? Because if the council had no powers over immigration in the first place, then how can a motion that was passed by the City Council have increased asylum seekers coming to Sunderland? And the answer is that politics isn't always about what somebody can do, but instead what they can persuade you to believe. And to understand how this all happened, we have to leave Sunderland and go to Southport. On the 29th of July 2024, 3 young girls were murdered in Southport in the most horrific crime that sent shivers through the entire spine of the nation. Nothing can ever justify what happened that day. and nothing can justify what happened afterwards. Within hours, false claims about the suspect spread rapidly online. Millions and millions of people saw information that just wasn't true. This video isn't about blaming one person or one post. It's about how misinformation spreads, because once millions of people believe something, the consequences become very real very quickly. Now, Sunderland wasn't responsible for Southport, but Sunderland was already under a lot of pressure. Housing commitments, political pressure, cost of living, services. Imagine a dry forest and no rain. For months and months, everything just becomes drier and drier. The branches, the leaves, and eventually a spark sets everything alight. For Sunderland, the Southport attack became that spark. Businesses attacked. Police officers assaulted, families terrified, hiding in their homes. But on a positive, that isn't the image of Sunderland that I remember. I remember the following day when the members of the general public and politicians from cross parties came together to sweep up the shards of hate that were left the night before by the rioters. That's the Sunderland that I know and I love. Now, the riots only lasted a day, but the damage lasted much longer. And I don't mean the broken windows and the broken buildings. I mean the trust. People started to get scared. People were fearful and scared that something like this could come around again. And as we all know, trust is much harder to rebuild. See, when we talk about the riots, we talk about what happened that day, but politics doesn't work like that. Politics has to deal with what comes afterwards, after Southport, after the misinformation, after the riots. And people were asking difficult questions about asylum and about who they believed they could trust. Even the national conversation changed. For months, on TV, in newspapers, in magazines, everywhere on the internet, it just spread all the time talking about asylum. Some people were trying to calm the debate. Some people were trying to heat up the debate. But no matter what happened, the debate was always asylum. Whether it be the hotels, whether it be the small boats, that was the only conversation Britain seemed to be having. And just like every city in Britain, Sunderland was also listening. Now, political campaigns don't happen in isolation. They happen inside the mood of a country. They inherit people's fears, their frustrations, and their hopes. And then they decide what to do with them. And just over a year after the riots, it was time to go to the polls. And this is where the campaign changes. I managed to get hold of one of Reform's leaflets during the campaign. This one right here. And I want you to pay attention to the number, the big number. 794%. And underneath it says that that is likely because of the City of Sanctuary.
Can you explain to people who might not have heard of the City of Sanctuary scheme how it works? Ostensibly, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, this is councils deciding to accept asylum seekers in. They get paid per capita for that, and they get paid by the government to buy up housing to supply asylum seekers. Is that correct?
As you said, it's a massive pull factor on asylum seekers coming to Sunderland. We've already got a huge housing shortage here. GP waiting lists, school places. We are really at the brink right now, and this has just been a huge pull factor. And our main situation was that we think the public should have been consulted on that before making such a huge change to the city irrevocably.
It says that there was a 794% increase in the number of asylum seekers being housed in Sunderland, with the biggest increases occurring after the City of Sanctuary was introduced, suggesting that the City of Sanctuary was to blame for an increase in asylum seekers by 794%.
Latest data on numbers of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers in the northeast. It says that there are 805.
We've been gaslit in a city that had just lived through the riots, a place that was already fragile, a city where asylum had become one of the biggest political issues. And in that atmosphere came this claim: 794% increase in asylum seekers, likely due to the City of Sanctuary motion. Then one of the most defining arguments of the 2026 elections was based on false evidence. Local elections arrive, and this leaflet is circulated widely across the city. It becomes a topic of conversation online and in every single online forum. The election absolutely changed Sunderland politics for a while. Reform took control of the council, and one of their first major commitments was to leave the City of Sanctuary. And in June 26, they brought that motion to the chamber.
This council notes that Sunderland City Council has previously been listed as a signatory to the City of Sanctuary initiative. but is not currently an accredited member.
I think this matter has been discussed enough. I think let's just get this matter over and done with.
You see that moment right there? That moment stopped me in my tracks. Why such a rush? See, the longer this debate went on, the less it seemed to be about the actual facts, and it seemed to be a story that had already been made up and told. Because if you slow down, read the motion, check the Home Office figures, watch the council debate and follow this timeline, you start to notice something. The story isn't as simple as it was made to sound, and maybe that's why they're in such a hurry to get it over and done with.
It was him who told GB News that this motion was a massive pull factor which brought tons of asylum seekers to the city.
As you said, it's a massive pull factor on asylum seekers coming to Sunderland.
Today, he has not mentioned asylum seekers or immigration once. He knows he has misled people about what this is. He also did not correct GB News when it was reported that the council was buying houses for asylum seekers.
This is councils deciding to accept asylum seekers in. They get paid per capita for that, and they get paid by the government to buy up housing to supply asylum seekers. Is that correct?
The main issue that we had with City of Sanctuary was that the public were never consulted.
49 votes in favour, 15 against, and the motion is carried.
Now this graph right here tells you the story better than I ever could. The increase did not begin with Sunderland's City of Sanctuary motion. It was already happening long before the City of Sanctuary motion was passed. And after the change of government from Conservative to Labour in 2024, the trend started to drop. Now whether you support Labour or Reform, that doesn't change what the Home Office figures showed. The rise began before the City of Sanctuary motion. The fall began while the City of Sanctuary motion still existed. And it started to fall once Labour had become the new government. Those are the irrefutable facts. So if the motion didn't cause the rise, and removing it won't make us see a decline, and if we were talking in numbers of people rather than in percentages, that's an increase from 90 asylum seekers in 2015 to 805 in 2026. So the increase began in 2015, but the City of Sanctuary motion passed in 2022. What exactly have we been arguing about? So how can Reform attribute the rise to that motion? The real question isn't whether the increase happened, it was why it happened. Some of you are not going to like this, but let's start with Brexit. When Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016, the British asylum system and immigration system began to change. As Britain left the EU, national immigration and asylum policy changed with it. These were decisions made by the UK government, the Conservative government of the day, not the Labour-led Sunderland City Council. Then came the Boris Johnson years. Legal migration reached record levels as new visa routes opened for workers, NHS staff, and international students, now known as the Boris Wave. The Boris Wave was supported by Robert Gentrick, who was the then Immigration Minister. He is now a member of Reform UK. It was also supported by the Home Secretary, which at the time was Suella Braverman, who is now a member of Reform UK. It was also supported by the leader of Sunderland City Council, Chris Eynon, who is now a member of Reform UK. All three people are former Conservatives that have now become Reform UK. If you walk through Sunderland today, you'll see people from all over the world. Not everybody that looks different to you is an asylum seeker. The University of Sunderland welcomes thousands of international students every single year. They pay international tuition fees and also rent homes and help the economy in the local area. So visible diversity did increase. But visible diversity is not the same thing as asylum. Then, in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine and Britain decides to start the Homes for Ukraine scheme. Thousands of Ukrainians came to the UK sponsored by families and communities right here in Britain. So the increase had absolutely nothing to do with the City of Sanctuary motion or the Labour-led Sunderland Council. So where does that leave the City of Sanctuary? You see, that's the question, because throughout the campaign, Reform constantly pointed to the 794% increase. Their leader even appeared on GB News and described the City of Sanctuary as a massive pull factor for asylum seekers coming to the city. The City of Sanctuary didn't cause the increase in asylum seekers. At full council, councillors stated that not a single person came to this city because of the City of Sanctuary motion.
In 2022, hundreds of people in Sunderland looked to see how they could support the women and children of Ukraine fleeing the invasion and the bombing of their country. Joining the City of Sanctuary movement never increased the number of asylum seekers in the city.
And that detail is very important, Because Sunderland City Council never got to decide where asylum seekers are placed. That's the Home Office. So where is the evidence that the City of Sanctuary caused this increase? Because if that evidence actually exists, it would be very easy for Reform to produce. Reform spent months telling people that the City of Sanctuary was the problem. So once they won the election, removing the City of Sanctuary and getting it over and done with was one of their biggest priorities. They needed to get this done, over with and out the way before too many questions were asked. But here's the question that I keep coming back to. If the City of Sanctuary wasn't the reason for the increase, why was it presented to the public by Reform like it was? You decide. Agree or disagree? Talk to me.